I'm going to be talking to Jim Wachowich, who heads up the Consumers Coalition of Alberta, about a fine that ATCO Electric has to pay. So welcome to the interview, Jim.
Good afternoon.
Now, this is, I guess the numbers are big enough. They have to refund $4 million for unearned rate increases, and they're going to pay a $3 million fine to the Alberta Utilities Commission, assuming that the commission approves the deal that was reached. Can you explain what exactly ATCO did wrong?
Well, in the simplest terms that I think viewers will understand is it's like someone inflating their expense claim, and then they go to their employer or the contract they have and say, pay my expenses. And after the fact, it's found that they did not incur that same amount in the expense. So ATCO, we had one historically a couple of years ago where they got caught by a whistleblower, and the commission accepted that the enforcement division of the commission accepted that there was a $31 million administrative penalty. And then after that was all publicized, two more whistleblowers, or a single person in two events, blew the whistle internally to ATCO, and ATCO's internal investigation responded, and then they self-reported to the commission that there were these two other events, one dealing with camp costs and the other dealing with a contractor's costs, where the numbers just weren't right. And they had put these numbers in front of the commission, and the commission had approved these numbers, and now they have to go back in and unwind that. And on top of unwinding it, they will pay agreed to administrative penalties, or, as you said, fines.
So my understanding is that these, there was a number that was agreed to, but it took ATCO 3 years to begin collecting those revenues from the, they were collecting them 3 years early from the consumers.
Yes, that's the accrual issue in accounting.
Right. Now, is that common?
Well, there are these accruals, and there are ways in which you collect and ways in which you book those, ways in which you report them. And ATCO was offside on the reporting and was collecting them within their rates early, and thereby, in essence, overcharging the customers in Alberta.
Okay, ATCO said, and I'll read their statement. ATCO is cooperating with the Alberta Utilities Commission to ensure these matters are reviewed and addressed, and we are committed to implementing any necessary corrective measures. We remain committed to ensuring our policies and actions are best in class and beyond reproach. I am sorry, you can understand why consumers might be just a little bit skeptical of that claim. What's your take on ATCO? Are they generally acting unethically, and this was an odd circumstance, or can we expect more of these?
I would say this. I mean, these are professionals in their professional capacity working at ATCO. If there were a few rogues in the works, up to no good, we hope this has captured or caught them, and the consequences for the company and the consequences for those individuals will be borne out. But what I would say going forward, and this stems from the first event where the fine was $31 million, they have agreed to tighten things up and build a framework that will allow better tracking and reporting. We haven't yet seen that, because that was supposed to be disclosed within the next tariff application, which is a work in progress and has not been filed with the commission. So when we see that, we'll be able to judge whether they've done enough. And then this is a reminder, we have to be ever vigilant. These are monopolies. That is, society or government grants them a monopoly with all of the privileges attendant to the monopoly, and with a singular responsibility: admit to being regulated by the regulator. And in Alberta, we've seen a real strong campaign about trying to diminish the power of the regulator, the red tape reduction, the streamlined regulation, all these things. And customer groups always looked suspiciously at those things. And we tried to say, look, let's not throw out babies with bathwater, as it were. retain an audit function, retain good oversight, retain all the necessary checks and balances. We probably saw those weakened a bit. We also know they were in what was called the big build at the time. They were crazy busy, lots of money flying around. So, we have to regroup and we have to learn from this. And I think the regulator, in most importantly, has to learn from this, that you cannot take what utilities say at face value. You have to have additional methods to get in there and check in on them. And those are the checks and balances, such as audit functions, etc.
There's been a lot of conversation in Alberta over the last couple of years about the utilities practicing economic withholding. I've interviewed you about several times about that specific issue. In March, we saw Premier Danielle Smith say that the Alberta Electric System Operator was going to be undertaking a market reform. There's a lot of complaining from customers about very, very high utility bills, electric bills in Alberta. It seems like the system is just not working as intended. And really, in this circumstance, had it not been for whistleblowers, we might not know this information. So, does the system need major systemic reform or just tweaking?
It's somewhere in between the two, Markham. It's we adopted this Enron model. We restructured the industry. Some call it deregulation. I prefer restructuring. And when we restructured and broke it up into generation and then the regulated parts like transmission and distribution and unregulated retail, all of that created complexities. That complexity spawns confusion, and confusion like that becomes a breeding ground for margin. And what have we seen? Higher prices. The total delivered cost of energy in Alberta is at times very volatile and is trending much higher than it historically was, even when you adjust for inflation and when you compare against other jurisdictions. So, these are clearly red flags, and we just don't know today that anyone in government can get their arms around this or their head around the scope of the problem. In 1996, when we embarked on this, it was a roundtable of probably about 20 participants that was required, because you had the regulated utilities and you had customer groups and you had government. Today, you have all manner of new entrants, whether they're the renewable energy people, whether they're the storage people, everyone, vying for attention, and it's become so complex, and that's part of the problem. But within that complexity, that is regulated, transmission and distribution, our group believes we have to really bolster that regulatory function. We have to state the importance of the regulator, and we cannot tolerate excursions from candor like ATCO has done.
So is it fair to say then that at the very time when it appears cases like this would argue that the regulator needs more inspections, more oversight, more ability, more transparency and accountability, the Alberta government is moving in the opposite direction with its red tape initiative and other policy measures to quote unquote streamline things?
I would say it's very much the case, and this is, and I'm not trying to be partisan here, but you don't have to look very far to figure out this is the difference between right-wing governments and more progressive governments. It's very hard to protect what industry starts to call and label red tape. But if you push back and say, look, remember, these were monopolies. And I would hazard a guess that many people have kind of forgotten, in the midst of all this, are monopolies. That is the wires companies or the pipelines and gas that get to customers. And when we forget that there are monopolies or monopoly adjacent players and oligopolies, you got to go back to economics, Lipsy, Sparks, and Steiner, Economics 101, and say, okay, well, what do we do with monopolies? Well, we regulate them, because there is no competitor and there are no forces of competition that will discipline them. So regulation is going to be messy. It's going to be complex. It's going to be costly. And, every time we hear someone say streamline it, we have to be very cautious that we're not likely to suffer the consequences, and those consequences have been borne out. We've had grid alerts now in the coldest days and one yesterday in one of the hottest days in Alberta. We didn't have those before when the system was top to bottom regulated.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome. Have a great day.